The morning Dorothy buried her husband of 47 years, she didn't go home. She went to a shelter. Not to volunteer, not to donate. She drove herself, 74 years old, in a car she hadn't driven alone in years, walked past the front desk, past the puppies, past all the noise, and stopped at one specific kennel. A big brown dog, 3 days from being put down. She stood there without saying a single word. Then she signed the papers and took him home. What happened over the next year nobody saw coming. Not her daughters, not the shelter staff, not Dorothy herself. Stay with me, because what that dog knew about her before she ever walked through that door will stay with you long after this ends. Dorothy and Robert Callahan met at a church social in the summer of 1971 in rural Tennessee. She was 22, he was 24, quiet, steady, the kind of man who listened like you were the only person in the room. They married 6 months later, 2 daughters, a house they built mostly with their own hands, 50 years of Sunday dinners and evening news, and coffee at 5:47 every single morning without fail. Robert loved dogs the way some men love faith, completely and without embarrassment. Over the years, they'd had a beagle, a yellow lab, a shepherd mix, each one loved deeply, each one buried under the oak tree in the back corner of the yard. When their last dog passed in early 2023, Robert went quiet. Dorothy thought it was grief. It always hit him hard. It wasn't just grief. 3 weeks before he went quiet, Robert had sat alone in the parking lot of his cardiologist's office for 45 minutes before driving home. Stage 3 heart failure. His doctor was honest. Robert wasn't going to get better. It was a matter of time and how he used it. He didn't tell Dorothy. Not yet. He carried it alone for 3 weeks, and the first person he told wasn't his wife. It was his oldest daughter, Karen. He made her promise not to say a word. He had something he needed to do first. Something for Dorothy. Now here's what you need to understand about Dorothy. Her whole world was held up by two things: Robert and their dogs. Through every hard season, loss, worry, the weight of ordinary life, it was always a dog on the couch beside her and Robert across the kitchen table. Those were her two anchors. Everything else moved. Those stayed. Robert knew this. He also knew something harder. When he was gone, Dorothy would be alone in a way she had never been in her adult life. Their daughters lived out of state. Dorothy didn't ask for help. She was the kind of woman who held herself together perfectly in public and fell apart quietly and alone at 2 a.m. Robert knew exactly who she was, and he started planning. In September, he started leaving the house on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. He told Dorothy he was volunteering, walking shelter dogs. She thought it was sweet. She packed him snacks. She had absolutely no idea. He was driving to Millbrook Animal Shelter, 15 minutes away, spending every visit with one specific dog. Brown and tan, around 70 pounds, shepherd mix, maybe some hound, nobody was quite sure. Surrendered 6 weeks earlier when an elderly man was moved into a nursing home by his family. His name on the intake form was Bear. Bear had been at Millbrook for 6 weeks with almost zero interest. He was calm, unusually calm, but large and older, and large, older dogs are one of the hardest placements in rescue. He didn't perform for visitors the way younger dogs did. He just watched, quietly, carefully. Robert stood at that kennel for nearly 20 minutes the first day. Then he asked to sit with him. They brought Bear into the small visiting room, plastic chairs, concrete floor, and Bear walked over slowly, sniffed Robert's hand once, looked up at him, then put his head in his lap. The shelter worker watching through the window said she'd never seen Bear do that, not once in 6 weeks. Robert came back every Tuesday and Thursday. He brought Bear's favorite treats. He brought an old, worn sweatshirt, unwashed, and asked the staff to leave it in Bear's kennel at night so the dog could sleep surrounded by his scent. And then he did something else, something that took weeks of quiet, patient repetition. He taught Bear Dorothy's name. Not as a trick, he would say her name slowly, softly, while showing Bear a small photograph he kept folded in his shirt pocket every single visit. Linda, a shelter worker with 19 years at Millbrook, used to watch Robert through the window of that visiting room. She told me, "I've seen hundreds of people love on these dogs, but that man wasn't doing it for himself. Every time he said that woman's name, Bear's ears went up. Every single time." Robert wasn't just visiting a shelter dog. He was building something, carefully, quietly, without Dorothy knowing a single thing about it. And what he built, over 8 weeks of Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, would walk out of that shelter and into Dorothy's life at the exact moment she needed it most. But first, Robert had to tell his wife he was dying. Robert told Dorothy on a Wednesday evening in October. He waited until after dinner, until the dishes were done and the kitchen was clean, and they were sitting in the living room the way they always did. Her in the armchair with her reading glasses, him on the couch with the television low. He turned the TV off. Dorothy looked up. She knew before he opened his mouth. 47 years of watching someone's face will do that. You learn the difference between every version of their silence. He told her everything, the diagnosis, the timeline. He told her he wasn't afraid. He told her he was sorry he'd waited 3 weeks to say it. Dorothy set her reading glasses down on the side table very carefully. She didn't cry, not yet. She walked across the room, sat beside him on the couch, took both his hands in hers, and said, "Then we're going to make them the best months we know how to make them." That was Dorothy. She held herself together like a woman who had survived enough to know that collapsing doesn't help anyone. She held it together so well that even Robert didn't fully see what was quietly happening underneath. The months that followed were tender in a way their daughters described as almost impossible to witness. Sunday drives, old movies, long mornings over coffee where neither of them talked much, but neither one left the room either. Karen flew in for a week in November. Their youngest, Patrice, came for Christmas and stayed 2 weeks longer than she planned. Robert kept going to the shelter. He told Dorothy it was his volunteer work, walking the dogs, keeping himself useful. She encouraged him. She packed him snacks without being asked. She had no idea about Bear, no idea about any of it. "I want you to sit with something for just a moment. This man, sick, tired, carrying a weight most of us will never fully understand, spent his last months of real physical strength not resting, not focused on himself. He spent them preparing a lifeline for his wife, quietly, without credit, without her even knowing. That is a love story, and it still hadn't reached its hardest chapter. By February, Robert's health had shifted noticeably. The afternoon trips became harder. Some weeks he made it to Millbrook once instead of twice. Linda said she'd gotten into the habit of watching the parking lot on Tuesdays because she'd grown used to his truck pulling in. On the days it didn't show up, she said the whole afternoon felt different somehow. Bear noticed too. On the Tuesdays Robert didn't come, Bear would sit at the far end of his kennel facing the door, not restless, not whining, just sitting, waiting, the way dogs wait when they're certain someone is coming and just not sure exactly when. In early March, Robert came in on a Tuesday and asked to speak with Linda privately. He told her everything, his diagnosis, Dorothy, the plan he'd been quietly building since September. He told her that when the time came, and he said it plainly, when the time comes, he needed her to do something for him. He handed her a sealed envelope. He asked her to keep it in Bear's file, to give it to whoever came to adopt Bear. He believed, he said this with complete quiet certainty, that it would be Dorothy. Linda looked at him and asked how he could possibly be so sure. Robert said, "Because I already told Karen what to do." Robert's last visit to Millbrook was on a Thursday in late March. He sat with Bear for almost 2 hours. Linda gave them extra time without being asked. She said she just knew. Robert didn't do any training that day. No commands, no photograph. He just sat on the floor of that visiting room with Bear pressed against his side, one hand moving slowly along the back of the dog, and it was quiet between them in the way that only happens when two living things have fully learned each other. When he stood up to leave, Bear stood too. Robert put both hands gently on either side of Bear's face, looked at him directly, and said something Linda, watching from outside, couldn't hear. Bear sat down. Robert walked out. He never came back. Robert Callahan passed away at home on a Tuesday morning in April. Dorothy was beside him. Karen had flown in 3 days before. Patrice arrived the night before he passed. He went quietly, without performance, with the people he loved around him. Dorothy held his hand until it was over. Then she stood up, smoothed the blanket, kissed his forehead, and walked into the kitchen and put the kettle on. Karen found her standing at the counter, staring out at the backyard, at the oak tree, at the small row of markers in the far corner beneath it. Karen put her arms around her mother, and Dorothy finally cried, long and hard and without holding a single piece of it back. When she was done, she washed her face and turned around and said, "Your father wanted me to do something. He made me promise." Karen looked at her. "He told me that when this day came, I needed to go to a shelter called Millbrook. He said I'd understand when I got there." She didn't go that same day. She wasn't ready. She went 4 days later, alone. Karen wanted to come. Dorothy was firm. Alone. So Karen sat in the driveway and watched her 74-year-old mother back out slowly in a car she hadn't driven by herself in years and disappear down the road with nothing but Robert's handwriting on a small piece of paper in her purse. She walked through the front door of Millbrook, and the woman at the desk looked up. Dorothy said, "My husband used to come here. His name was Robert Callahan. I think he left something for me." The woman didn't say a word. She picked up the phone and called Linda. Linda came out from the back carrying a worn manila folder. Inside it, Bear's intake papers, his vet records, his feeding schedule, written in Robert's handwriting. And at the back of the folder, the envelope, white, slightly worn at the edges from months of sitting in that file. Robert's handwriting on the front, "For Dorothy, when the time comes." Linda set it on the counter and said gently, "He told me you'd come, said you'd know what to do." Dorothy looked at the envelope for a long moment. Then Linda said, "Would you like to meet him first, before you open it?" Dorothy looked up slowly. "Meet who?" Linda smiled. "His name is Bear." They walked through a narrow hallway past the front kennels, loud back there, barking, movement, the kind of layered noise that hits all at once. Dorothy held her purse close and kept walking. They turned a corner. The large dog section was quieter, calmer. Linda stopped at the third kennel on the right. Dorothy looked in. Bear was lying down facing the door, completely still, watching. He was large and brown with deep amber eyes, old eyes, the kind that have seen enough to stop being surprised by most things. Dorothy said later she hadn't known what to expect. She'd imagined something smaller, maybe, younger. She hadn't imagined Bear. Linda reached for the latch. The exact second that door swung open, something shifted in Bear's entire body. He didn't jump, he didn't bark. He stood up slowly, the way older dogs do, careful with himself. Then he walked directly to Dorothy, not to Linda, who he knew well, not toward the hallway, straight to Dorothy, and pressed his whole body against her legs and stayed there. Dorothy stood completely still, with one hand over her mouth. She reached down and touched the top of his head. Bear made a sound, low and soft, and sat down on her feet. Linda had worked at Millbrook for 19 years. She had seen real connection before. She said she had never seen anything like that moment, not once. They brought Dorothy to the visiting room. Bear didn't leave her side. When she sat, he pressed against her leg, his head across her knee like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Dorothy held the envelope without opening it for a long time. Then she took a slow breath and opened it. She has only shared part of what Robert wrote. Some of it belongs only to her. But she gave permission for this much because she said, "He didn't write it just for me. I think he wrote it for anyone who has ever been left behind." Robert wrote, "Dorothy, if you're reading this, then you drove yourself there alone, which means you're already stronger today than you think you are. His name is Bear. He belonged to an old man who had to leave him behind. He's been waiting a long time for someone to take him home properly. I've spent my Tuesday afternoons with him since September, and I can tell you he already knows your name. I made sure of that. Take him home. Let him sleep near your bed. He won't ask much of you, but he will give you everything he has." On the mornings that are hardest, and there will be hard mornings, Dorothy, I won't pretend otherwise, put your hand on him and remember that I sent him. I loved you well. I hope you felt it. Robert. Dorothy folded the letter. She sat quietly for a moment. Then she looked down at Bear, who hadn't moved, still pressed against her, those amber eyes watching her face, and she said out loud, softly, to nobody in particular, "Well, I guess you're coming home." Here is the part of this story that doesn't get talked about enough, the part that isn't romantic or poetic, but is simply true, and that Robert understood better than most. Grief is not a single event. It is a long season, and it is cruelest in the ordinary moments, not at the funeral, not in that first terrible week, but at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday when you reach for the coffee mugs and only need one, when the evening news comes on and the couch is empty, when you wake at 3 in the morning and the silence has a weight that nothing quite prepares you for. Research on spousal loss in adults over 65 shows consistently that social isolation following the death of a partner is one of the single greatest health risks an older adult faces, not just emotionally, physically. Grief without a daily anchor accelerates cognitive decline, disrupts sleep, increases cardiac risk. The body responds to deep loneliness the same way it responds to illness. Robert didn't have a medical degree, but he knew his wife, and he understood that what Dorothy needed wasn't a casserole dropped at the door or a weekly phone call from another state. She needed something that required her to get up every morning, to go outside, to be needed by something living. He gave her Bear, but what he actually gave her was a reason. Bear came home on a Thursday afternoon. He walked through the front door, moved slowly through each room, reading everything, building his map of the place, then walked into the living room and lay down in the space between Dorothy's armchair and the couch, right in the center, like he'd already chosen his spot and had simply been waiting to get to it. Dorothy stood in the doorway watching him, and she said she felt two things at the exact same moment, the sharpest grief she'd felt since the funeral, and something else, something she hadn't felt in weeks. She felt less alone. It has been 14 months since Dorothy brought Bear home. She drives herself to the vet now, to the park 2 miles away, to Millbrook twice, to drop off donations and see Linda. Things she hadn't done alone in years. Karen says her mother sounds different. Not like the grief is gone. It isn't, and it won't be, but present, here. Bear sleeps beside Dorothy's bed every night. Every morning at 5:47, Robert's exact coffee time, he stands up, walks to her side, and waits. Dorothy says she doesn't think that's a coincidence. Neither do I. Robert Callahan spent his last months of real strength building a bridge from his life into his wife's future out of one old brown dog that nobody else wanted. He sent her exactly what she needed and made sure it would be waiting. If that isn't love, I don't know what is. If this story reached something in you, share it. Someone in your life right now is doing exactly what Dorothy did, holding it together in public and falling apart quietly at 2 in the morning. Send it to them. And if you have a dog beside you right now, put your hand on them because they already know. Drop a comment below. Tell me about your Robert, your bear. I read every single one. Subscribe for a new story every week. I'll see you in the next one.